So great to have you all here today for the last Esade Impact Talk of this year. We want to say that this is organized by the Esade Center for Social Impact. Me and my colleague Juan Carlos work there. We are an academic think tank that tries to bridge the world between academics and practitioners, working together on social impact, getting new insights, but also, as we do today, helping future leaders, but also leaders in the field to get more insights and conversate together to bring the sector forward. So we're very happy to also organize this with Esade Careers. And this has been the 5th edition, so it's like the last session of the 5th edition. This series, we will provide insights into like more the impact ecosystem, where we hope many of our students who are also joining today will end up and have an impact career. And we hope that this session will shed a light on what can you expect if you are aspiring for such a career. That's about it for my introduction. And I really want to introduce, well, I would love to introduce the speakers, but I would leave that to Rita. But we're very, very pleased and happy and grateful that John Kluge and Carmen Correa have accepted our invitation to speak today. And also very, very happy that Rita Mota, associate professor at Esade, has also accepted to moderate this panel. She is working at Esade for quite a bit now, and her areas of specialization are human rights and also business ethics. And she works also, like we do in the Center for Social Impact, a lot with the field. So she works closely with NGOs in human rights to help this sector forward. So we're very pleased to have her here. I will stop sharing the slide now, I think, or leave it on for a bit. I will leave that up for you and give the floor to Rita. I would say a big cheer and enjoy the session. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks so much, Laura, and thank you to the Esade Center for Social Impact and to Esade Careers as well for having me and for giving me the opportunity to meet our two very wonderful speakers, whom I also thank for so generously giving us their time and for sharing their insights with us. And of course, thank you all for being here today and for joining us as we think about this very important and timely question: how can entrepreneurship and strategic investing create solutions for migration, peace, and social inclusion? Now, to address this question, we are joined today, as Laura said, by Carmen Correa, CEO of Pro Mujer, and John Kluge, who is founder and senior advisor at the Refugee Investment Network. Both of them have lots of experience working to foster social justice, and in their current roles, they contribute to the promotion of gender equality and the inclusion of refugees, respectively. Now, I'll give them the opportunity to tell you more about their work in a second, but before I turn the floor over to them, let me just briefly explain how this is going to work. So the three of us will be having a conversation during the first part, and while we're talking, please feel free to add your questions and comments into the chat, and I'll see if I can weave some of them into the conversation, but in any case, towards the end, we'll open up the floor for Q&A, so you'll have an opportunity to engage with them directly there. So Carmen, John, thank you again so much for joining us today. We are absolutely thrilled to have you here. Shall we start? Okay, then if you don't mind, I will start with a question for John. John, you are a systems entrepreneur, impact investor, social justice activist. You co-founded the Refugee Investment Network, which is a fascinating organization that contributes to long-term solutions to global forced migration. You've developed an investment framework. You connect investors to refugee supporting ventures. You support policy and narrative change. Previously, you'd co-founded the social enterprise Toilet Hackers, dedicated to scaling access to dignified sanitation for the 2.5 billion people around the world without a toilet. This is incredible. What inspired you to embark on this journey, and how did you take the first step in turning your passion for social justice and inclusion into a career as an entrepreneur and impact investor?
Well, thank you, Rita, and thank you, Laura, as well, for having me on. It's a real honor to be here, and to be here also with someone like Carmen Correa, who's sort of a secret hero of mine, and I'm a big fan of Pro Mujer as well. So I don't have a short answer to this, but I'll try not to be long-winded, because my path, like most entrepreneurs that I know, has not been a linear one. I'm now 41 years young, and my hair is migrating and turning gray, but I still feel pretty youthful, and I still don't really know exactly which way I'm going. So take this all with a grain of salt. I think the two factors that influenced my direction as a career and really wanting to try and use the time that I have here to make change, one is feeling a real deep sense of gratitude. I was adopted. The family that, or the biological mother that brought me into the world, she didn't have the means to take care of me. And I got very lucky as a 2-week-old baby, was adopted by a family that couldn't have their own kid, and was raised by two parents that were both immigrants, incredibly compassionate people, and both quite entrepreneurial in the way that they looked at the world. So I think that was part one. Part two was really being influenced by my dad, who was an entrepreneur himself. He was in and out of over 200 different businesses over his 95-year life, all over the world. And one of the things that I saw, because when I was born, he was actually 68 years old. So there's a tremendous gap in our generation, or generations. And I only got to see him in his last chapter, which is a strange phenomenon as a child to not know 2/3 of your parents' life, at least not to see it and understand it firsthand. But one of the things that I saw from him was a consistent focus on making a difference. It sounds a little bit cheesy, but that's, I mean, he made his wealth and then spent it down. So that was a traditional approach. But I had the opportunity when he was 89 to spend about 3 months helping him get back to health after he broke his hip. And I got to interview him almost every day. We ended up doing a small book out of that project, sort of like a Tuesdays with Kluge experience. Um, but I asked him why. I mean, why is this how you've spent the last 20 years? And he said there was one regret he had, it would have been to go back from the beginning and to go into medicine. And then I, of course, asked why medicine? Because it was the only profession that he knew of throughout his life that was a guaranteed direct connection to improving the outcome for someone's life. It was the most kind of tangible thing for him. But of course, he didn't grow up around social entrepreneurs. Impact investing wasn't exactly a field at the time. So now imagine I'm a young post-college professional trying to find my way. I start meeting entrepreneurs that are looking at double and triple bottom line approaches to their business models. I'm meeting investors who are focused on achieving social and environmental outcomes just as much, if not more so, than they are seeking profitability. And this was a big aha for me, that you don't have to make these big trade-offs as a career. You can actually find one and the same together. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a traditional profession like medicine or education, for example. So that was a big aha. And I thought about the blessings I had as a kid and growing up and what resources I have. I don't have my father's wealth, but I have time. And at the time, I was actually young. I had likely a 50-year career ahead of me. So time was my asset. How do I use that? And my dad always said, which is now on his gravestone, it said, in the sands of time, each individual makes very little difference. But what difference we can make, we should make. And so that has been kind of my compass, trying to figure out how to do that the best. And it happens that someone like Bill Drayton, founder of Ashoka, has been very influential in helping me think about the difference between direct service work and systems change. And so systems change is often one of the more difficult approaches. It can be very fleeting, but when you get it right, it can be completely transformative. And so that is where I have focused with both toilet hackers and sanitation work, and then with the Refugee Investment Network in the context of migration and durable solutions.
Thank you so much, John. That is an absolutely fascinating and really moving story. And we will come back to your current work to ask for some more details, but let me move to Carmen for a bit. Carmen, you are a seasoned leader in the development sector with over 30 years of experience. As a CEO of Pro Mujer, you drive financial inclusion, healthcare access, women's empowerment across the whole of Latin America. In 2023, Google.org named you one of 7 leaders to watch for your vision and leadership in social change. In addition to fostering the autonomy, safety, and economic independence of women, their families, and their communities, you engage with international organizations to promote gender equality globally. I am in awe of you. And I really want to know, how did your impact career start? And if you reflect on your journey so far, what stands out to you? Was there maybe a defining moment that led you to this path?
Thank you very much, Rita. Thank you, Laura, Juan Carlos, Esade, for this invitation. It's difficult to follow John after this actually very compelling story. But basically, I'm from Uruguay. I'm the mother of 3. I have, as you said, more than 30 years of experience in operational management, strategic planning, program execution in the sustainable development world in Latin America. I started working here in Uruguay at the Organization of the American States, and then I worked at the Inter-American Development Bank in Washington, D.C. I lived abroad for 7 years, but then at some moment I felt that I needed to return back to the region where projects actually, where the initiatives actually are taking place. Therefore, I decided to come back to my country to be closer to the causes, to be closer to what it's really my passion. And it's really the way of giving back, as John was stating, some of what I have learned, what I have received. We have to be clear that everybody here participating in this event has also the capacity of making a change, as John was stating, the capacity of building something, and the capacity we are in a position of privilege. So we need to be clear about that, and we need to think and try to give back whatever we may give back. So in 1999, I started working in a company here in Uruguay that under the name of Remate.com. It was an internet company. It was in the middle of the internet bubble. It was about building something completely new during the rise of the internet. And it was not only fun, but it was a great experience, learning experience. I also had the opportunity to bring into Uruguay Endeavor. Endeavor is a foundation that supports high impact entrepreneurs. And we started with the operations in a moment where entrepreneurs was not as well known, and the definition itself wasn't even known. So we needed to start actually by explaining the concept of what is an entrepreneur, and it was building the whole entrepreneurial system in Uruguay, the whole ecosystem, entrepreneurial ecosystem in Uruguay. So it was also another learning experience, an experience where it actually allowed me to build something from scratch. So once I finished at Endeavor, I left the organization and I was actually offered to join Fundación Avina. Avina Foundation is an organization that supports and works on sustainable development in Latin America. It's a very big foundation. I was not only in charge of the Uruguayan operation, but I was also leading the inclusive business strategy for the organization at the regional level. And that allowed me to work with entrepreneurs of the base of the pyramid. So after Avina, I learned that there was a huge need around entrepreneurship in the base of the pyramid. After that, I started also working in the development of financial instruments, and the opportunity to join Pro Mujer was actually at the perfect moment. It was 8 years ago. It was at a moment, at a real tipping point. And for me, something that changed my view. It was when I started working closely with organizations focused on social development. I saw firsthand the power of opportunity in transforming lives. And actually, I remember meeting women who, with very, very little support, they could actually completely change their life, not only for themselves, but for their families. And that is what Pro Mujer is allowing me. So for me, it was a path where actually it took me to actually reach the perfect point with Pro Mujer.
That is fascinating, and oh my God, all the work you've already done. This is really incredible. I find it very inspiring. I wanted to ask you if you could tell us a little bit more about what gender lens investing is all about from Pro Mujer's perspective, and maybe give us some examples so that we understand it a little better.
Yes, of course. At Pro Mujer, gender lens investing is not just a strategy. It's part of our DNA. Actually, from the very beginning, we have been investing with this gender perspective, with this gender lens. For us, it means intentionally directing capital to initiatives, businesses, and solutions that are either led by women, that benefit women, or that they contribute to reducing gender gaps. So we have seen that investing in women creates a multiplier effect. Women reinvest in their families, their communities, and drive long-term sustainable development. But we also know that women-led businesses, particularly in Latin America, in my region, they face significant barriers, structural barriers to us accessing capital. And that is what we are trying to promote. That is why for the past 35 years, we have been working in the region, providing women access to the needed capital, providing them with opportunities that include the access to these needed funds, healthcare services, and also training. In addition, Pro Mujer, we know that we need other change makers to make the change a reality. So that is why we focus on raising awareness. We promote gender lens investing. We promote transformative power of the gender lens investing through our GLI forum. This is an event that actually we have been organizing for 6 years now. We bring together into this event investors, entrepreneurs, organizations, policymakers to show that investing with a gender lens, it is not only the right thing to do, it's also a smart business and key to building more inclusive economies. It has a very powerful economic effect, and that is why we are promoting gender lens investing.
Perfect, thank you, so clear. John, can you tell us about the refugee lens, which the Refugee Investment Network has developed? Give us some examples as well, maybe.
Of course. Thank you, Rita. Well, we built the lens largely inspired by the gender lens. So everything that Carmen was talking about is largely why we did this work. There's a slightly smaller pool of people that we're talking about. With gender, we're talking about half the world. And the systemic barriers that women and girls are facing. But capital has largely, for too long, been held primarily by what we call the male, pale, and stale community. And that needs to change and shift, but it's not going to shift and change without intention and real practice. So, it's a similar dynamic with people that have been forcibly displaced. When I started working on migration, there were about 65.5 million people who were forcibly displaced. Half of those roughly were refugees, meaning they're people that have crossed an international border while fleeing persecution or violence or conflict. But the other half are internally displaced people, and there are many people internally displaced. But today, 10 years later, there's now 110, over 110 people forcibly displaced. So this work started because the traditional mechanisms over the last 80 years that have been used to support people after a major conflict are really insufficient and aren't meeting the real needs of people. Post World War II, it was kind of the foundation of what's now the modern refugee response paradigm was created, beginning with the 1951 Declaration. And, and that really was designed to meet emergency needs: food, water, shelter, medicine, and basic security for people, under the primary assumption that everyone would either get to go home or would be formally resettled into a new permanent home within 5 years. Today, people are displaced for an average of 26 years, not the 5-year average of people who fled, Europe during the Second World War. And that becomes problematic for a number of reasons. One, as a human being, you're sort of in a middle space. You're neither there, going somewhere where you want to go, nor are you able to go back to where you came from. You're in this sort of perpetual state of limbo. But the other problem is that the scale and the duration of meeting the needs of temporary and emergency things is too much for the international donor community to meet. And we have seen over the last 15 years, the budget line of meeting these basic emergency needs continually growing. In fact, it's almost exponential. And the available funding supply of the traditional donor community, we're talking about government dollars and private philanthropy, has been going down. And so since the last decade, we've seen this increasing delta on this side of that graph, showing the gap in meeting those basic needs. And that's just meeting those basic needs. That is what we call survival. But human beings are human beings, and we aren't built just for survival over decades. We are built for flourishing. We need things to hope for. We need to be able to provide for our families and have a sense of dignity and purpose in our lives. These are the kind of things that help achieve contentment and happiness. And without that sense of purpose, the ability and the right to work and the freedom of movement, it's very hard to live a fully fulfilling life, especially over the long term. So the question is, where do you get that money? How do you meet these needs that are emergency needs? And then how do you create long-term solutions for people? And that's really where the private sector comes in, and the broader world of entrepreneurship and innovative finance. What I've found over the last decade is that there are organically people using entrepreneurial approaches to build their own livelihoods, even in places that are extraordinarily difficult for them from a policy perspective. There are only 2 countries in the world that give refugees the legal right to work. It's Iraq and to an extent Mexico, once they've filed for asylum. But outside of those contexts, it's a gray zone. Jordan has permitting in place from the Jordan Compact that came out of the post-Syria crisis. But people are doing interesting things despite all of that. So the lens that we created was a framework. It's a basic framework that allows people to sort of look at the world differently through that view of intention, and creates a little bit of a taxonomy that allows entrepreneurs, business executives, as well as investors and financing partners, both in the private and public sectors, the ability to develop a real investment strategy. That might mean you are a displaced person, like my friend Manyang. Manyang was a former lost boy out of South Sudan, who ended up being resettled here in the United States. Now he's running a coffee company. Now, Manyang, as a displaced founder, is looking for capital. He's looking for social relationships and connections to help him scale. He's looking for expertise and technical assistance. But he's got a great idea, a good business model, and a tremendous amount of grit and patience. So he would be what we call like an R1 founder or a Refugee 1 founder in the taxonomy. And I put the link here in the chat. But then you have companies that are also using their products and services to improve outcomes for people that have been displaced. That can be especially important in what we call sort of social determinants of work or access to economic integration. So that's housing, transportation, banking and financial services, childcare. There are, of course, some overlaps too with the gender lens. But this is really about getting business leaders and business leads within companies to think about a use case for their products and services. Plus, there's of course hiring. So you have organizations like the Tent Partnership for Refugees that were founded by Hamdi Olokai of Chobani that are helping companies all over the world to hire refugees. But again, employment is one pathway, but it's not the only pathway. The same is true for entrepreneurship. And many companies, whether they're founded by displaced people or companies using products and services or employment to support them, need to grow. And accessing working capital, particularly in emerging markets, is very challenging without any sort of impact thematic layered on top of it. Then you add in the impact work, and access to capital becomes even more of a niche challenge. So you need dedicated investors and financing partners like Pro Mujer, who are explicitly looking at deploying capital to improve outcomes for these communities that have been locked out for too long. And that is kind of what the Refugee Investment Network is about. It's a bit of a connector and matchmaker, but we are also in the business of creating on-ramps for new partners. And I'll just end with one quick little example, and that's Kiva. Kiva was providing small microloans to Palestinian refugees several years ago. And that was the totality of their portfolio for lending to displaced micro entrepreneurs. And this is in the context of microfinance and micro entrepreneurship. We work really with the whole market ecosystem now. But 10 years ago, you would have a very hard time finding a single microfinance institution in almost any country in the world that was willing to lend to displaced founders. And part of the reason is the perception that these people would leave. They're here temporarily, they're going to go back home, or they're going to go somewhere else. And that's a flight risk. Why would I give them capital to start a business if they're only here for 6 months? We know that that's not true. There was real genuine bias at play, sometimes racially motivated, gender motivated, any number of things, and other general factors. But there was no track record. That was part of the problem. There's no data. So we asked Kiva if they would expand this. They were very much interested in that. The microfinance institutions, their local implementing partners who actually do the lending, said, well, we'll do this if you can give us the money for free and without risk. Meaning Kiva had to lend it at 0% interest, and it had to be something that they could walk away with if it was all lost. The conditions were met. We started with a small $1 million campaign that was largely crowdfunded in 2017 that was launched on World Refugee Day. And within 24 hours, all of those loans were fully subscribed. That told us that there's a demand here. And slowly, Kiva started expanding that portfolio. And that became so successful after $8 million lent in over 8 countries under those terms. They developed their first for-profit investment instrument, the Kiva Refugee Investment Fund, or KRIF, that was offering both principal plus interest to investors. And it was specifically focused on supporting displaced entrepreneurs. That investment vehicle started with a $30 million close, $20 million of which was provided in debt financing anchored by the U.S. Development Finance Corporation. So there's a lot of details in how that whole thing came to be, but it's a good example where you've had sort of catalytic capital and grant funding in place to start something brand new that creates a pool of data that reinforces the economic argument here, not just the doing the right thing, but doing the smart thing. And then you have scale and that becomes a real viable investment pathway. So we want to do that across the marketplace and in all different kinds of geographies.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think all of us in the room might be wondering how you navigate such complex waters. Both of you work in spaces that are already very complex in and of themselves, and that have in recent times been exposed to several cultural, political changes, some backlash against diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. How do you navigate these spaces? What sort of challenges do you encounter currently? And what advice would you give to people who are trying to work in the same space as you in these complex times that we're living in today? I don't know who wants to start. Carmen, we haven't heard from you in a bit. Do you want to start?
I can start if you want, of course. And actually, we are listening and we are hearing a lot of this backlash on gender issues. So first of all, like as you were stating, Rita, we are working in regions that are changing all the time. We are facing great challenges when we face the economic crisis, we face the political crisis. So we are always trying to navigate these challenging moments. This is something that is not new for Pro Mujer. It's something that we are used to. We are working in Latin America, in those countries that most of the people don't want to work. So, and it's where the need is bigger. So it's where we are. And Pro Mujer, in this regard, is always trying to evolve because the countries changes, the culture changes, the clients, the beneficiaries change. The needs of the beneficiaries have changed. I'm always stating there was almost non-internet. Right now, digital education is key, so we have to adapt ourselves. So we, as an organization, we just launched a new strategy to expand our impact through more technology, innovation, and partnerships. Change is always a challenge, especially in this context. So as leaders, I'm encouraging always the team to think outside of the box and to try to expand our opportunities, to try to concentrate on the positive side and not the negative side. Usually the negative side is always the ones in the news. We have to concentrate in what we can do, what we can control, and the change and the opportunities we can foresee. In that sense, I think that there are three key things to focus on. First of all, we need to keep using our voice. It is important to explain the why our cause is not a trend. And for us, this is gender is not a trend. We need to communicate the why, despite being tired of saying and sharing information about the why. We need to keep doing so. We are still advocating for a more equal world, and we need to keep doing so. Second, not letting these movements dismotivate us or steer us away from our mission. We cannot change. We are not going to change our mission. Today, more than ever, we need to keep going forward, moving forward. We must do it through basically a collective effort. We need partners to be working with us. This is not a competition, and the entire ecosystem actually should be working together, and we have to be very well aware of that. And third and finally, I believe it is essential to show and give a voice, especially to those who are still committed to gender equality. At Pro Mujer, this is a commitment we have made. We want to show those that are still working with us. We want to give them more visibility. We don't want to give space to those who drop off their efforts. We want to shine the spotlight on those who are truly committed to change, communicate with hope and optimism. It's really important for us.
Thank you, Carmen. I agree with you. It's so important to emphasize hope, right? It can be very, very easy to lose sight of what it really is that we're fighting for. But unless we insist on preserving hope, it might be too difficult to continue. So thank you so much for those very inspiring words. John, what do you tell us?
Well, I mean, I always find inspiration from the entrepreneurs that we get to work with, and just to see, how they're getting through things. Usually before we call and have an idea, they're already doing it. There was an amazing baker I met in San Diego, who immigrated here from Iraq. She and her husband were resettled. They were fleeing religious persecution. And their bakery was growing. They received financing and entrepreneurial training from the IRC, which is the International Rescue Committee's Center for Economic Opportunity. If you haven't heard of IRC's CEO, not David Miliband, but the Center for Economic Opportunity, it's worth looking at as an interesting debt financing model for small businesses. They support new Americans as well as local communities, and their presence in these communities helps foster social cohesion and stability. But that business and the couple that I met there, they had expanded into the wholesale market during COVID. And that was a period of time when most businesses everywhere in the world were kind of struggling. And yet they had figured out how to expand and were meeting the need of people that were staying home longer, and really used it as an opportunity to develop a new market. But they were able to do that because of some creative financing that got in place as well. So that's where I kind of look for hope. I think that we can also look at history to see where we have maybe made some wrong turns. My country, at least, has made quite a few wrong turns, but we have a pattern of finding our way forward again. So there have been some big steps backwards in the US's short 250-year history, but we have also made strides despite that. And no matter what you see in the news, there are always people who are really committed to doing this work. I'm very lucky that we have a great organization that's doing that. We have a great board that's very supportive. We have a wonderful board of advisors as well. Someone asked in the chat a couple of questions. One of them was about mechanisms, including stakeholders and governance and decision making. So we have people with lived displaced experience on our advisory council, on the board of directors, and always on the ground in the countries that we have major programs. And they're often the ones that are leading those teams. So that's really where I find the hope and inspiration. And of course, I have a 7-year-old daughter who is extremely precocious, and she challenges me every day, but she and young kids remind me of things that we have to do. So I also think about another hero of mine, Jane Goodall, and she talks about hope, the meaning of hope, but hope is something that doesn't just happen. We don't look for it as if it's like something we're waiting to fall out of the sky. It's something that happens because of action. So when we are facing real challenges, we have to take steps forward, even if we don't know how we're going to take those steps. We just do it. And then all of a sudden you can look backwards and realize that you've moved a mile or more, and that you suddenly feel that things are possible again. So to me, hope is about working through what seems impossible, and not worrying too much about the direction.
Thank you, John. And thank you also for emphasizing this importance of looking back, not just looking back at our own journey, but also historically to try to understand the bigger picture and make better informed choices about the future as well. So thank you. I think that's extremely important. I love the fact that you picked up on one of the questions from the chat. I would love to throw it over to Carmen as well, so that we have both sides of the question. Carmen, do you have any mechanisms in Pro Mujer to include the main stakeholders in governance and decision making?
Yes, we do. Actually, we are always trying to listen to the different stakeholders. We have various stakeholders. We have, at first, our beneficiaries, we have our employees, but we also have investors, we also have donors. So we are always listening to them. We are always looking for their feedback. We are looking always to getting to know more on what they pursue, their values, and get to incorporate what's needed in the new services we develop, in the new products we develop. So we are always trying to actually be very open to listen to all of our stakeholders.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Andrea, for asking the questions. I know you had another one, but there are some more questions coming into the chat, and we don't have much more time. So if you don't mind, I'm going to move to another one, and then if we have time, we'll come back to you, Andrea, okay? So we have a very interesting question here from Akriti. I hope I'm not completely butchering your name, and I apologize if I am.
No, that's thanks.
Okay. So the question is quite complex, right? So Akriti tells us that as a recent graduate in law and global governance with some experience working with Indigenous women in Guatemala and migrants in Barcelona, your thoughts really resonated with her. In the last few years, she's been increasingly concerned with growing polarization or polarizing narratives, both towards women and migrant communities in the West. And now that she's getting into the impact investing, she sees how investment trends are shifting towards tech, AI, and digitalization. And so she's asking, how can we ensure that these advancements are inclusive and beneficial through both gender and refugee lenses? I don't know who wants to start.
Carmen, do you want to start?
I can start, and for sure, John has much more to add to that. It's a challenge, let me tell you. Of course, AI is here to stay, and technology is it can allow us to keep expanding our impact, to keep reaching more women in our case. But on the other side, we have to secure that nobody is left behind. In our case, for example, we have deployed different platforms. We put in place Emprende Pro Mujer, but at some point and in some communities, we end up developing an hybrid program where we use, of course, the platform, the content of the platform, but we end up going to the community with different facilitators, training community leaders, build the capacities at the community level. So it's a challenge. And one of the main challenges also is that all these biases we have in the real world are not transferred to AI. And that is something that concerns us a lot. So Sean, I'll leave you there.
Thank you, Carmen. Yeah, I would add just we don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. And this is something I hear a lot, I say a lot, but it's true. And in this work, you have to begin by beginning and not overthinking things. At the same time, it's important to be working as close with the communities you're trying to serve as possible. So if they're not in the organization, if they're not on the investment committee, if they're not part of the governance structure, I think that's really hard to do well. I don't think that we would have the problems facing gender inequality today if every investment committee was equally represented by men and women. I mean, I think that if we had way more women on these investment committees than we do, again, I don't think that we'd be having these problems. Certainly not to the extraordinary degree we do now. So on the other hand, if you think about narrative change, we have to tell better stories. As it relates to migration, there are two prevailing narratives that we hear all too often. And those are the two stories that are told in mainstream media and then regurgitated by political pundits. The story is one, fear. The other story is vulnerability. Neither of these are a full picture. Yes, when people are fleeing extraordinary circumstances, they are in extraordinary vulnerability. That is true. But most of the people I have met who are coming from a displaced experience are truly some of the most resilient and courageous people I've ever met. You just cannot compare what they are willing to do for their families. It's remarkable. So those stories need to be the prevailing narrative, not the one of extraordinary vulnerability and not the one of these, people coming to steal our jobs or whatever. Refugees are net contributors. They happen to have the highest rates of entrepreneurship of any demographic group. That's largely out of pure necessity because many of the traditional pathways tend to be closed to them. They have just as good, if not better, lending repayment rates. And there is this other factor. I've sometimes described it as like the immigrant alpha. It's this thing that I think is inherently deep as a human spirit. Almost, it's a sense of proactive gratitude, where you have a new chance to build something with your life, whether it's for yourself or your family or children, and you are going to pay that forward. And in most cases, refugees do that in spades when they're given the opportunity. So we need to take those stories of success, whether it's in an entrepreneur starting over from scratch and building a successful company, whether that's a small business or something as big as WhatsApp. Or we need to tell the story of how displaced people are contributing to the culture and success and growth of large companies. There is a reason that Hamdi believes in hiring refugees. It's because over 30% of his company are represented by people coming from displaced backgrounds, and you better believe it has transformed the success of his company. So when we talk with business executives about this thesis, most of them don't need very much convincing because they understand where people from displaced experiences are coming from. It's really when they get stuck in the policy hurdles or the question of, well, how do I do this? Or what does an investment portfolio of this look like? And that's where organizations like the RIN and others, we're working with other intermediaries in different countries, can be very helpful to new investors or financing partners in figuring out how to do this better. But honestly, the technology and AI and digitalization, yes, as Carmen said, there's inevitability there, but there's lots of other business sectors that aren't focused on that are really basic stuff. We're talking about like banking, getting people access to transact. We're talking about childcare. If you are a parent and you don't have a place for your child to be taken care of, especially if they're young, how are you supposed to go start your company? How are you supposed to be able to take a job or go to the job fair? You can't. It's very hard. So these are things that are investment opportunities themselves that enable the upward mobility of people that are coming from a different experience. And so I think it's as much about recognizing what those barriers are as much as it is the threats of the new investment trends that we're facing. Because we're going to see plenty of that stuff on the tech side, but there's plenty that's non-tech enabled that are fundamental business opportunities. They just don't have that kind of new, sexy, shiny, trendy thing attached to them.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Akriti, for your really good question. I think we're running really low on time, so I will go to a final question from Cesar, which is a perfect question to close this conversation with. Cesar is interested in understanding what, in your view, is the differentiated role that youth, say Gen Z, could play in taking the impact sector as it is today to the next level, considering the values that they tend to embrace, their skills, and their approach to challenges.
Well, for me, basically, the new generations are much more aware of the impact they can generate. They are much more aware of how they should be behaving And of course, they are used to the use of technology and innovation. So in that regard, for me, it's something that can add a lot of value and that can really, we will see a change. We will see a change in the changing generations. But yeah, we have a challenge ahead of us. I believe the global economic crisis it's having some devastating effects, and of course, especially on the most vulnerable populations. So how these new generations behave will be key. And I think that they are much more aware of what they can add and the value and how they can change this reality.
Wonderful, thank you. John?
I think for me, it's the intersectionality of everything. So, like my aha as a guy coming out of college was, oh, I can build a career that is focused on merging, my goals to achieve financial success as well as social or environmental impact on the world. Now we have challenge areas and crises facing the world that are so interrelated. And I think it's almost an obvious thing for many in Gen Z. The correlation between climate change and displacement, the interconnectedness of equity and healthcare. So finding a way to solve two problems with one solution set, and to work together in very non-traditional ways, I think is almost like an innate super talent for the next generation. And I'm pretty fired up that we have a whole new team of change makers coming into the world.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Well, I think it's time for me to say thank you and give the floor over to Laura. So thank you both so much. And thank you, everyone. I had a lot of fun and learned a lot. So Laura, over to you.
Thank you so much indeed. It is really inspiring and really insightful. Lots of things to think about. I just wanted to ask one question because we have 5 minutes, so I always see opportunity. If you look back and you think now, if you could give an advice to your past self about the impact journey in 1 minute, what would it be?
Oh, it's difficult to give advice. I think each one should look for its own kind of what motivates each one of us. But I think the advice it will be trust the process. When you are clear about your goals, your personal goals to generate a meaningful social impact, everything else will fall into place sooner or later. So it's when you believe in something, and this is for a personal or professional matter, but when you believe in something and you try to follow the path, everything will come in place. This type of career, when you talk about John's career, my career, it requires a very high level of resilience. Let me tell you, we have to be very resilient, and you have to have the ability to manage frustration. And actually, we cannot allow external circumstances to discourage or demotivate us, because you will find those challenges. You will have to confront those challenges one and then. So many people depend on our work. We have to be very well aware of that, on how we are generating an impact. And of course, we have to continue moving forward.
Thank you so much. John, some last words before we close?
I think for me, it would only be to be less polite. I think I spent too much time trying to mind my manners with business partners and professional relationships, and I think that sometimes direct honesty will save a lot of time and heartache. And that would be my one piece of advice. Otherwise, I would keep swinging, take chances, take more chances while you're young, and maybe try and start a business earlier. Because now at 41, as a parent, also managing our farm, I'm exhausted. And I think it would have been better if I did it 20 years ago.
Okay, thank you so much. So yeah, let me just thank you, all three of you, also Rita, for moderating this panel. Thank you everyone in the room. I just want to share that if you want to keep updated about the work of our center, please feel free to join our newsletter or follow us through any social media. So yeah, a big thank you, and we hope to continue to connect to you in this space. And wishing you all a lovely afternoon, evening, or morning.